I grew up around literally like old McDonald-ish type farms where you'd go and they'd have a few pigs and a chicken coop and some cows and stuff. And that it doesn't exist anymore.
At least not very often. Yeah, I just took a trip out west, a road trip out west, and went past so many feedlots, like large cattle feedlots. And it's just, is that the best thing that we can do? Can we do better?
Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Here We Are podcast. I am Shane Mauss. You are a wonderful, curious person who is listening to this show, who is full of everything that's good. Congratulations, listeners. You have all of the good things. Today, I am continuing. I've told you I've been working with last year. I'd connected with some really cool guests at the University of Tennessee, and I started kind of working with this One Health initiative, which basically means they give me a list of cool people and I interview them. And it's been a really fun relationship getting to dig into everything that they do from kind of an interdisciplinary perspective. And we're going to hear a little more about that if you haven't heard about it in the past. But today's guest is Marcy Souza is joining me today. Marcy, I usually just have my guests introduce themselves because I am the worst and always forget everything and screw it up. So do you know anything about yourself? What do you do?
Well, sometimes I'm interesting to myself, sometimes I'm not, but I'll try and be interesting today. So that's the whole point of this, right? Is to make science interesting.
Yeah. Ideally.
I'm a professor at the University of Tennessee College of Veterinary Medicine. And usually when I tell people I'm a veterinarian, they usually ask me, well, do you large or small animals? And the answer is neither, really. So I actually specialized in public health. And a lot of folks don't really know what that means. But historically, veterinarians have been kind of the backbone of food safety and preventing disease spillover from animals to humans. And so that's sort of my area of specialty. And I've been here since 2005. So I've been here for a while. I guess I'm a true Tennessean now.
So I'm curious. It's August 2021. We've all had a really interesting last 16 months or so. Why should the public care about disease spill over from animals?
It's really not that important.
Explain why that would be of interest to anybody.
Yeah, and so it has been very interesting because, of course, as a public health veterinarian, most people don't really pay attention to you. You have to teach epidemiology, which most people find to be pretty boring. You teach about these diseases that spill. Oh, yeah.
I would have thought epidemiology would be I have a harder time with the nuts and bolts kind of like microbiology,
yeah, but it's not. Epidemiology is definitely not as sexy as like surgery or ophthalmology, things like that. And so our classes always get pretty bad student reviews.
Really?
Yeah, and it's not because we're bad teachers. It's just because they're like, this isn't relevant. I don't need to know this. And so, honestly, like a year and a half ago, I just kind of did my stuff at my job, and half the college probably didn't really necessarily know who I was. They sort of did, but then all of a sudden COVID shows up, and the public health veterinarians.
Look who's important all of a sudden.
Now who knows some stuff. And so a couple of my colleagues, I've got a few other public health veterinarians that I work with, and we were really instrumental in coming up with the policies and plans to keep the hospital working. And, I think it's just that knowledge of, while this is no longer a disease of animals, it's really a disease of people. It probably spilled out of bats, right? Whether it went through a lab in a Chinese city somewhere, we don't know, but coronavirus has come from bats. And I think that knowledge and how infectious disease and epidemiology works was sort of valuable this year, much to the detriment of my mental health, because I ended up basically having two jobs.
Right.
Yeah, so we'll see how the next 6 months go.
Well, where are you putting your money on the lab leak thing? I put my money on no lab leak. Would you like me to tell you why?
Yes, please.
It's mostly because the people that are mostly interested in forwarding lab leaks tend to have more of an agenda of building a narrative of distrust with science than they do of getting down to the bottom of things. It seems because you'd think if like there was a lab leak, those people would be like, there was a lab leak. Everyone, quick, wear masks and get vaccinated. My God. But that's not actually it's more of like there was a lab leak. Don't trust these people. Don't trust anything that science has to say ever. And because they caused this. And so also don't let them fix it. Seems to be a lot of the narrative that exists out there on social media. And also my other reasoning is they tend to not make falsifiable predictions. They tend to like the WHO could come in and be like, there was a lab leak. I'd be like, I was wrong. You win the bet. But if the WHO says there wasn't a lab leak, that's just more evidence that they're hiding things.
There's more fodder.
So there's nothing there that could ever possibly be falsified. There's no way I could ever win that bet because the person taking it would never pay me no matter what evidence is shown. So that's just based on that is why I tend to lean like, maybe not lab leak. But compelling. I'd certainly love to know if it is a lab leak.
Well, sure. But, I think in addition to what you said is there's also kind of that xenophobia that goes along with it of, well, let's make the Chinese be the bad guys.
Right.
Because I think if you blame it on them, it's not our fault for, having more and more people on the planet and ruining ecosystems and having this interaction
I didn't do it. Someone else fixed this problem.
Yeah. Well, and it's not the first coronavirus to spill out of bats either.
Yeah.
So if you look in history, just in the last, 15 years, this is the third one. I guess 20 years. It's the third one. So one of them's going to stick.
I have a real, and maybe this is why I like epidemiology more than the average person, is I have a real fondness for evolution and emergent properties and systems that come to the surface, and I think that requires a bit of some of the things are counterintuitive, and whereas if you kind of have a top-down thinking about everything, you can top-down thinkers tend to think it was like a lab or there's like things plotting against you or whatever, and tend to ignore that. No, these things can just emerge from this whole insane myriad of causations, loss of biodiversity and global travel and all of these other factors. You combine them in just such a way, and hey, some viruses pop up from time to time, and it's no one likes to deal with that, but it's a reality.
I think if we're going to make a movie, though, the lab leak theory is a better idea. Like, it's definitely a better movie.
That's that's the other reason why I don't trust it, is because, I didn't do remote podcasts before COVID. I would come to your lab, your office, your house, whatever, and record with you, each one of my guests. And so I saw like the situation that people can see on the camera right now. It's not really like a mad scientist sort of situation that you see in the movies. There's not just beakers. You're not wearing a lab coat, and maybe as soon as you turn off the camera, you get out all of that.
This is all just a fake facade behind me.
Yeah, and so I think people get their concept of science from the movies, and the lab leak thing definitely feels more like a movie plot. And again, I could be wrong. I'm happy to be proven. It would be fantastic to. It certainly wouldn't be the first time there was a lab leak either. It's just that we, in preparing for the future, I feel like understanding things that like what the One Health initiative is doing, which is raising awareness and bringing this to people's attention of things like, the climate change and loss of biodiversity and aspects of our modern living are actually going to make more of these. Even if this is a lab leak, there's still going to be zoonosis that will impact us in the future, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 100 years from now, probably more often than that, even considering our modern climate and conditions. And so either way, it's no reason to, it just seems like a way that people dismiss things, and so they don't have to think about it or do anything about it. So that's my opinionated take on it. I'm sure a lot of my listeners are like, think you're a fool. Bill Gates did all. Not a lot of my listeners, but
some people out there
on social media, yeah,
for sure.
So anyway, you've boy, I didn't realize I had so many rants in my pants. So you had, first off, little tangent. Have you ever played the game Pandemic?
I have not.
Oh, it's fantastic.
You mean other than what we're doing right now, like an actual game?
There's an actual board game called Pandemic. It's one of my favorite board games that there is, and it would be a fun way to like get kids into epidemiology, actually, because you have the whole globe and there's viruses popping up and you got to do different things to control them. It's really fun. Anyway, I'm still caught up on the fact that people didn't like epidemiology. But how are your teacher reviews now that there's a global pandemic? Have people been appreciating you a bit more?
Last year, everything was a little weird because we were teaching virtually.
Yeah, that's a sampling error right there. You can't really tell anything from that.
So we just kind of ignore that year. I mean, honestly, usually my teaching reviews are pretty good because fortunately I don't teach the direct epidemiology. I teach more of applied epidemiology with zoonotic diseases.
What's that mean?
Well, when you actually teach epidemiology, you're teaching, okay, what's the difference between prevalence and incidence and how do you calculate risk rates and sensitivity and specificity? And so they get bogged down in doing the math. And so I actually take those concepts and apply them to, okay, let's talk about West Nile virus or Rocky Mountain spotted fever or rabies or things like that. And so take those concepts, but actually apply them to a certain disease so that they've got this little baseline that they learned before they get me. So the class is split in half, essentially. And so my colleague, he gets stuck teaching okay, here's how you calculate sensitivity. And they all go, do I really need to know this? So usually I can get decent student reviews by, coming up with fun stories. Whenever I talk about.
Oh, sorry. It was actually my very next question was what gets people's ears perked up? Because when you say, can I guess?
Yeah.
Rabies.
Yeah, rabies, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, so because rabies,
gets people interested.
It's usually like 2 or 3 lectures, and I tell various stories, and one of the stories that's always humorous is I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. You can get on these listservs about disease outbreaks or individual cases of particularly rabies, and there was a rabid beaver at a lake in North Carolina that was attacking people.
I just had this whole conversation with my uncle got bit by a beaver one time, a rabid beaver.
That had to hurt. Their teeth are huge.
Their teeth are so huge and they can cut through trees and everything. Cause I've been getting into beavers lately because I got into stand-up paddleboarding lately. Okay. Yeah. And there's these areas around me that I've been going where I see beavers and they're exceptionally skittish creatures. And they have, you can't get, even if you're floating and very quiet and you just are floating toward them and don't move, they'll see their whole tail situation. It's for storing fat as well, but the reason why it's flat is to slap and scare things off. And you can't get anywhere near one of those things. And so rabies must be a heck of a thing if it's making beavers turn the other way and be like, I'm going to attack that crazy bearded guy on a device I've never seen before who's holding a huge stick.
Yeah, so that's one of the stories that usually the students are like, what? Really? And so then you use those little stories like that to catch them, and then they get
interesting.
Yeah.
What's up with rabies? Can you? I know we didn't plan on talking about all this, but I'm having too much fun, and I want to know because I was having arguments with people about this recently. I'm like, you can't people are like, you should watch out for those beavers. Just because my uncle had, when it's like when someone had something like bizarre impact them, and then it's like the availability heuristic or whatever, they think it's more of a prevalent situation than it actually is. And so I've been having like beaver arguments with the fam recently, and
not a common thing.
not a common thing at all. How does a beaver get raped? Is rabies just pervasive amongst many species? Can a lot of different things?
So it can infect any mammal.
Wow.
And so pretty much. So
That's
it's
amazing.
kind of weird. So like you think most viruses are pretty species specific. Rabies is not. And so rabies can infect pretty much any mammal. Some are a little bit more resistant. So for whatever reasons, like opossums, our Virginia opossums that we have in North America, just about never get rabies.
Oh,
There's
wow.
theories as to why. I'm not exactly sure, but yeah. So typically, like our rodents, you usually don't see a whole lot of rabies in rodents because most of our rodents are small, and so if you have a rabid animal bite them, they just die from the wounds, right?
Yeah.
And so the only rodents that usually will be diagnosed with rabies are groundhogs or woodchucks and beavers, because if they get
something
bitten
that can survive a fight.
Yeah, so it survives a fight, goes off,
fascinating.
and a month or two later, all of a sudden it's got rabies. But yeah, it's only the bigger ones that
a month or two later,
Well,
you just think you got away, and then you just start acting a little wonky.
Yep. Yeah, and so another fun thing about rabies, if you don't know this, it actually travels. The virus physically travels up the neurons and has to go all the way to the brain.
Yeah.
So like if you get bitten on your big toe, your incubation period will be longer than if you get bitten on the face.
Wow. Because I saw some weird thing. Was it just someone telling me about this? Either way, it sounded like BS, but they were like, if you get bit by something that's rabid, you have like 48 hours or you're a goner.
No, that's not true.
Okay.
Unless you get like bitten in the brain. Which probably
if you get bit in the brain, get to a hospital.
Yeah,
for
quick.
Rabbit or not.
No, so like the incubation for people usually is at least like a month or two. Like you don't want to dilly dally. Go ahead. Well, especially because like most people don't have rabies vaccines on board. So
I imagine someone just kind of getting like slightly rabid, and then they're like, "Yeah, I'll get to it tomorrow."
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. No, usually once people or animals, once they start to have symptoms of rabies, they usually die.
oh wow.
Yeah, there's a very
so
small
within
handful
that-
of people that have survived, but it's almost 100% fatality. So like if you do get bitten by a rabid animal, so they actually just recently changed the importation laws that dogs from certain countries, I believe it's in like Eastern Europe where there's a big rabies problem, that they're very much not allowing those importations because it's, they're incubating as they're traveling, and then they end up with rabies a month or two later.
Amazing. So, holy cow, that is. And then you're a goner. By the time you have symptoms, it's too late.
Yeah, there's a handful of people that have survived, but it's
wow.
rare.
That is so good to know, because I got to be honest with you. I'm like the type to get bit by a wild animal and be like, whatever.
It's fine. Yeah,
I'll put some hydrogen peroxide on it.
Yeah, depending on the animal. So certainly, like, I don't know where you actually are, but there's.
I'm in Wisconsin.
Okay, yeah. So you probably have foxes. I don't know if you've got a ton of terrestrial rabies up there. You probably have some. But like we've got raccoons and foxes and skunks down here, and then bats are everywhere that could potentially spread it.
Yeah, we got some of that going on. Because isn't it, once you get rabies, or when a mammal gets rabies, doesn't it, it just releases just tons of cortisol or something, right? You're just like amped up, like the stress hormone all the time.
You mean that's why that's why they act crazy?
And then like can't they also, doesn't it shut down the ability to sleep? And they can't sleep for like days, and then I think you can't salivate or something.
Well, you can't swallow. So it
you can't swallow, or you can salivate, but you can't swallow. So you're
basically
thirsty
salivating,
and you can't. Oh, that maybe that's what it is. You're like starving because you can't swallow, and then you're foaming. And
if you're in the mouth, you've got all this spit in your mouth that you can't swallow, And then that also
Wow.
because it's transmitted in saliva, so that you've got all that
so
saliva with
tricky.
rabies in it. Yeah, it's good. So basically, it paralyzes the swallowing muscles, and you end up with all this spit full of rabies.
That's incredible. What virus are you most impressed by, like phenotypically?
Oh, man. I don't
It's a
know.
tough one,
COVID's
huh?
pretty damn interesting. Like
It is, huh?
Well, I mean, everyone thinks that that a pandemic, like the worst pandemic, would be something that had like a rabies fatality rate, but no way, because it would die out too fast, and people would actually
Right.
like pay attention to get vaccinated and take
Mhm.
and like actually take precautions to prevent it, because it's like, oh god, I'm gonna die. So I think it's like when you play the games of pandemic, and there's also one on the CDC's website that if you're trying to design a pathogen to cause a pandemic, you actually want it to have a really low case fatality rate. Because
Yeah,
people are
there's
like,
well,
meh, it's not that big of a deal.
what was like tuberculosis. That was a good creeper. Because
Yeah.
it's like 15 years later you start just coughing weird.
Yeah, like super long incubation period. And the thing about TB now is there's a lot of it that's drug resistant. And so, you've got to be on all these special drugs for a really long time. And sometimes you've got resistant strains of the bacteria that doesn't respond. And so it can be really tough to treat.
Okay, what's fascinating about COVID from your perspective? I mean, that's a lot of fascinating things.
Well, so
but-
like a year and 3 months ago, when this first started happening, I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. This is the
Yeah.
coolest thing. Like, this is what I study. This is what I teach.
Yeah.
I wrote an op-ed about it. I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is not the first time this has happened. And then I think that it sinks in like, oh, this really sucks.
Yeah.
And so, like, not the virus itself, but like just thinking about all of the implications on society and people's lives, and how the mental
the first
health
3 months
passions,
were
yeah.
like the most interesting
Oh, yeah.
time ever. It's like you get to you'd be on Twitter and there'd be a picture of someone that put like a milk jug on their head in the grocery store instead of a mask. Like, wow, I can't believe I get to see this. This is scary and everything, but like, what a spectacle.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I think kind of what is more interesting than the virus itself, I think, is people's reaction to having to deal with stuff like this. Like, I know that my parents, I had lunch with them this weekend, and my parents are 80 years old, and they're just like, I don't think the CDC knows what they're talking about. They just keep changing their mind. And I'm like, no, it's the virus keeps changing. Like, it's evolving in front of our eyes. And I don't think that most people have that much of an appreciation for the natural world and how, I mean, sure, we see like animal species, but they don't evolve at this rate that we can recognize. And so we're seeing this constant evolution of the virus. Oh, it's got a new host and it does this. And so I think just kind of the implications on people's knowledge of how science actually works. Like, we don't have the answers to everything immediately.
So this is a section of a show I sometimes do where I make myself vulnerable, where I try to explain a concept in a way that I think about it, knowing damn well that it's probably I'm missing something. I have a blind spot. I'm articulating it incorrectly. And then you get to correct me in front of everyone.
Let's hope
Each
I can.
week, the listener gets to hear how wrong I am about life generally. And it's really fun. We like it. So when I think about kind of the evolution of host parasite or host disease interaction and this sort of arms race that happens, and obviously I think I oversimplify things a little bit, but as you were saying, kind of the virulence is sort of what makes it tricky. Potentially, I've heard people make a different argument too, that maybe we're taking it for granted that a virus won't just be super virulent sometimes and just have a delayed onset, and that could happen as well. I just had a guest on talking about that recently, but I tend to agree that the less virulent ones through history have been super successful, and I tend to think that like with AIDS, for example, AIDS seemed more. There's lots of treatment and the science that's advanced since the beginning of AIDS has been incredible. But also, as people started becoming aware of the cause and started becoming aware of like not sharing needles as much or different kinds of sexual activity or whatever else that might cause and blood transfusions and being more aware, doesn't that make the kind of less virulent strains almost get favored, the ones that have more of a delayed onset and whatnot? And I guess the point is if people were doing lots more to distance and mask or whatever with COVID, wouldn't COVID kind of have to be successful, have to have ones that are maybe less virulent but last longer or something like that? Whereas if all of the population, if we just decided, say in May, that we're like, hey, we're all going to pretend like COVID is completely over because a few of us have been vaccinated, and now it can just spread kind of as much as it wants to. Isn't it possible that more contagious and more virulent strains will be selected for just because they can, and if they can, they'll proliferate? Does any of that make any sense? Is that in line with reality?
Yeah, well, so yes. And so kind of in the short term, so I mean, basically what we're seeing now is we're seeing this Delta variant that is probably more virulent, that it causes worse clinical disease in people. But it's definitely more infectious. And so that's when we start talking about that R0 number. So like if I'm infected, how many people am I likely to infect? And so there, the estimates I've seen is that it's probably about 2 to 3 times as infectious as the original strain.
So the original was like 2. This is like 4 to
4 to
6
ish is kind of what I've heard. And so certainly like when you've got all these large pockets of susceptible people, then you do see this disease emerges because you've just got, mixing and evolution occurring. And so a particular strain comes out and it realizes, ooh, I've got a slight advantage. And that's basically what happened when this Delta variant came out of India. So they had like a 3 to 4% vaccination rate across the country, and they've got like 1.2 billion people. And so that's just a huge population of susceptible people for it to brew in and end up with this new, super virulent, not super virulent. Sorry, that's not really the right. Virulent kind of implies that it's more deadly, but more infectious. And so that it's going to spread faster. But long term, and so that's certainly going to be helpful now. But eventually, like most things that end up hanging around for a long time are sort of like our seasonal flus and our seasonal colds, that they kind of are like, they're not that big of a deal. They annoy us. But you kind of almost end up with a commensal relationship with them. And so it's not enough to kill you because like if the host kills me, it's unlikely it's going to be able to keep spreading.
If the virus kills the host, it's unlikely.
So if I get rabies, I'm unlikely to bite someone else. I mean, it could happen, I guess.
Yeah.
But so you're not going to see rabies spreading like you would a respiratory pathogen because you've got to have that direct, usually bite associated with it. And so having that lower, case fatality rate and a high infectious rate is, kind of the perfect storm that's made COVID so successful. But, I think long term, most pathogens tend to lose their really nasty bite so that they can actually have a commensal relationship with their host.
So,
Well, and so that's, that's the thought now is that more than likely, like we may have a few more iterations of variants of COVID, but, eventually it's probably going to end up becoming an endemic coronavirus that we deal with every year that changes slightly, almost like the flu.
Isn't the mRNA kind of a game changer that you can just pop in a new code and put out
amazing.
A booster pretty quick?
I'm not a virologist. I don't make vaccines, so I don't want to talk out of turn, but I think it's amazing.
I've had people on. Yeah. It seems like a game changer in terms of like maybe it isn't the case that we have to just live with things in the way that we used to think, and just the speed at which you can, and it's that you don't need to like redo the studies and everything. You're just popping in the new strain and boom, you have just in the same way that they aren't retesting the flu vaccine every year, or I mean, in terms of like approval process or whatever, it's like you have the process approved. And so once you have that, it takes like 3 days to run it through a computer to pop out here's the formula. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing in terms of from an epidemiology point of view is when we were talking about the R naught, or is that the amount that it spreads? When we talk about 2 now up to 4 to 6, well, what's measles, like 15 or something like that, or 12? Yeah. So because of the how contagious something is, that factors into the kind of mathematical model of how many people would need to be vaccinated for if a vaccine is this percent effective. Here's how many people would need it to eliminate measles or whatever. And measles, I think, is something like when it starts dropping below 92% or something like that,
it's in the 90s,
areas, it starts popping up again, just because 12 spreading to 12 people potentially and that means spreading to 12 people under a condition of no vaccines, right? Like if vaccines weren't
that's basically
thing.
If you've got a population of 100 people. And if at least a good chunk of them are susceptible, so they haven't been vaccinated. Then they're susceptible to me being around them with my fluids and spreading it to, and it's an average of 12 people. So some people may have higher or lower viral loads, but yeah, so basically the higher the infectivity. And so that's one of the issues with this Delta variant is when the vaccines first came out, they're saying, okay, like probably about 70%.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Right. And now it's like, oh, maybe it's actually more like 80%. And we're not. So are we going to ever get there? And now that the vaccine doesn't necessarily protect you from infection, I mean, for some people it does, but there's certainly breakthrough infections that at least it protects you from severe illness or death. But, can you ever truly reach herd immunity? And that's a term that comes from vet medicine because we run the herd of cattle through the chute and vaccinate every last one of them.
Yeah. Now, how does that work? Exceptionally effective, right?
And so it's interesting because there's a number of coronaviruses in veterinary medicine that affect dogs or chickens or cattle that honestly over the years we've had pretty crappy vaccines for. And so when this coronavirus first emerged, some researchers in the veterinary world were like, the vaccines that we've got for the coronaviruses in animals they're okay, but they don't work great. And so this mRNA is such a game changer because it's a completely different platform than anything that's been done for vet medicine. And, think about for veterinary patients, like there's not billions and billions of dollars being poured into curing infectious bronchitis of poultry. Right. And so even though it's a huge economic disruptor globally, it doesn't affect people. And so I think it's a matter of, maybe I think it'd be kind of cool if this technology actually gets converted into dealing with some of the veterinary diseases that are globally a problem.
Well, probably will, because it will probably be pretty cost effective.
Right. Now that the technology has been proven.
Yeah. And that's because there's such a issue with antibiotics and putting so much antibiotics in ourselves in hospital and being overprescribed, not using them correctly, using them in so many cattle and everything else, and that's such a different and that's a threat in and of itself, and that's another thing that kind of that vaccines sort of take care of. A vaccine's just kind of giving a cheat sheet to here's the threats that are out there rather than a ongoing treatment.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, there are some, I'm trying to think if there are any humans. There are some bacterial, like vaccines for bacterial infections in vet medicine. They're okay. They generally are a little bit more difficult to develop and be as effective as vaccines for viruses. But yeah, you're exactly right. So like the indiscriminate use of antibiotics, be it in humans or in animals, those can end up in the environment. They can end up in our food system. And, is there ways that we can prevent the use of those antibiotics if they're not really necessary through the use of vaccines or probiotics or whatever it happens to be? to prevent those infections from actually ever happening.
So you studied chickens a bunch, right?
Good segue.
Is it well, it's not a great segue.
Well, no, I was just talking about chickens and their coronaviruses.
Well, yeah, I was thinking, because I might be, they sent me a big list of names, and there's two people, you and someone else, that both research different aspects of chickens. And I was like, give me both the chicken people on the same. I think I tried to line it up so it was going to be a whole chicken episode. But so I bring that up because I'm forgetting what chicken research you do. Are you the rural chicken?
So I usually do backyard poultry research.
Yes. Okay, because that's all the rage these days.
I mean, I'm pretty in fashion. I don't know if you noticed, but
yeah. No, I was gonna say that same thing. Actually, I was gonna bring it up myself. No, I just had I was in last week. I was visiting a high school buddy in Minneapolis, and him and his wife were having a debate about, and I was, I didn't, they didn't ask me if I wanted to mediate it, but it was a situation that happened and I was there. And so, but they were having a debate. So, the wife, she wanted either backyard chickens or a goat, and I
get the chickens.
And then that's what I said. I said chickens all day, and he wants neither, but is maybe considering compromising. And I said, yeah, get the chickens. I mean, eggs are awesome. Goat's not going to do a lot for you. You have such a small property that it's bordering on unethical to have a goat in this yard. And it's like, do you hate mowing that much that you're okay with like picking up poop and stuff instead? And so it was, I went chickens, of course. And then they're like, well, how many chickens? And then, so that was a whole debate about how many eggs they're going. I think they're putting out, I think they're fertile for, what are chickens fertile for, like 6 to 8 weeks or something like that at a time?
Oh, no, way longer than that. No, mine lay. Longer? Oh, yeah, mine will lay. So I have, I'll sound crazy if I list all of my animals, but I think I've got maybe, well,
now I'm going to make you.
Well, so this is a hazard. Like if you ever know a veterinarian that doesn't have too many animals, then there's something unusual about that animal, that veterinarian.
Because you got to take some in and stuff, right? There's a whole.
Yeah, and so like I can give opinions on both chickens and goats because I have them both.
Okay.
And so goats, I have 4 of them. My first goat actually got kicked out of our local zoo for headbutting a woman. So her name is Babs, and she's just kind of
the woman or the goat?
The goat.
Okay.
The goat, yeah. So then we got 2 little ones to be her buddy, and then one of my friends asked me to hang on to their goat temporarily while they fix their
that
fence.
Old trick. They're like, you know what? Keep the goat.
Yeah, so I've had the goat for like 4 years now. And so while goats
never fall for the old goat sitting trick.
Yeah, like it'll just be a few months.
Yeah.
But so like everyone sees the baby goats online and they're like, oh, they're so cute. They're so wonderful. Goats are kind of jerks. Like they headbutt you and they're pushy and they don't actually graze. They're mostly browsers. And so they're crap for mowing your lawn. Like if you want to clear out poison ivy and brush, they're good, but
that's the bill of goods that you're sold with goats.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to mow your lawn for you.
They do
That's
not.
what people, no. Okay.
They do not. But yeah, and then I've got chickens. And so a number of my chickens are actually from research studies that I've done that I've adopted. And it's sort of a ploy to trick my significant other into letting me have more chickens.
Yeah.
So I just tell him, I'm like, well, I couldn't find any home.
We can edit this out if you want.
He knows.
So it's still on. Oh, he knows. You're forthright about that's
I was like, well, I couldn't find anyone to adopt him.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Chickens are great, though.
No, chickens are great. So they're pretty funny. They're entertaining. They give you eggs to eat.
What are we talking eggs-wise, though? Like, what's the period of time, like within a given year, that a given chicken can lay?
So my chickens usually kind of start to tail off in like November, December,
Okay.
And then start laying again in probably like February. So there's like about a 3-month period that I don't get a whole lot of eggs.
So that's all. It's the same. It's the same time. I didn't know if it was like intermittent or if they all.
No, like
were-
sometimes they will. So like last week it was super hot here, and I think my chickens were just like sitting there panting. They weren't eating a whole lot, and I didn't get very many eggs because I think they just were struggling because it was so warm.
Yeah.
But typically when the days are short, you don't get a whole lot of eggs. And so if you look at commercial poultry production or for eggs, they actually mess with the light cycles to keep them on super long days to keep them laying. I don't do that with my chickens. I let them take a break in the winter and just give them a guilt trip. Well, I'm like, now I've got to buy eggs to make Christmas cookies. Thanks.
Yeah.
Because I didn't make any. But yeah, so typically they just kind of have an annual cycle that when the days are really short in the winter, I'll get an egg here or there, but they don't lay a whole lot of eggs. But they can lay a lot. Like in the high season, once they start first of the spring, I think there was one day I got,
from one.
So one chicken can only lay one egg per day.
Oh.
So the amount of time it takes from, and this is probably more detail, from the follicle to leave the ovary to go all the way through the shell gland, get the albumin put on, and then put the shell on takes like 24 hours. And so it's basically a day for egg to go from this to out.
So shorter days, sometimes it'll take like 2 days or something for
or they just won't even, they'll just stop cycling in those short days.
Just not in the mood today.
Not in the mood. Sorry, not making eggs. Not enough light. Yeah, so they're they're basically very much light driven. But yeah, so chickens are pretty fun. I think how many do I have? Maybe like 16 or 17 chickens. They're pretty fun,
average through a year, what would you say a chicken on the season that they're laying eggs, 4 a week? You'd pretty consistently, right?
Oh yeah, I'd say like
4 or 5 a week.
Probably like 4 or 5 a week when they're actually laying.
Yeah, that's why. So I was telling my friend, he's like, how many eggs do we need? I'm like, well, it's you, your wife, you have a 12-year-old. He was trying to tell me he needed under a dozen a week. I'm like, a dozen's bare minimum for 3 people in a week, I feel like, eggs-wise. What are you going through eggs-wise around your...
It depends on the time of year. Like, when I get lots of eggs, I actually make quiche and I freeze them.
Perfect.
Yeah, and so, like, I've got a freezer with a bunch of quiche in them. But, I mean, we'll go through maybe about a dozen a week. But I don't eat eggs all the time.
My argument was that you're popular with the neighbors then too, right? You have extra eggs. That's like, you're well liked in the neighborhood if you're gifting fresh eggs to people. And so, yeah, so that was I'm glad to hear science prove me right that chickens, backyard chickens over goats.
Yeah. My goats, while they are entertaining, sometimes I just want to kick them because they'll come up and just
what does something that annoys you?
They're really pushy sometimes. Like they'll just come up and start like just putting their shoulders into me and trying to hook me with their horns just to be bossy.
Yeah. Do you just got to show them who's boss?
Yeah, kind of like there's been times where I'll just kind of push them away, or there's years ago, one of them hooked me on my arm and I came in and I was talking. Like hooked me with their horn. With
their talons or whatever?
Well, no, like with their horns. Like they managed to get my arm and just like ran there. And so I had this huge bruise on my arm. And I come into work and I was talking with my hands and you could see the person's eyes be like, oh my goodness, she's getting abused.
Yeah, I am by a chicken.
I'm like, no, by a goat. No, this is the goat that did it.
The goat did it.
Yeah. No, the chickens confused. They're good. Yeah. So every once in a while, goats...
I was totally screwed up. Yeah, goats are assholes. We already established that. But what about chickens are great though.
Chickens are great. Hens are great. Roosters can be assholes as well. I've got one rooster amongst mine, and he's a little bantam one, so he's like wee big. And every once in a while, he'll come up to me and pretend like he's gonna like do something to me, and I'm just like, really, buddy? Like you weigh a pound.
Is he a pretty happy fellow though? And with all those ladies,
he's got all those ladies. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd think so. So what does backyard chicken research look like? What is that? What kind of research are you doing?
Yeah, so
that's awesome.
I guess it's probably been, 5 or 6 years ago since we did the first study. And so backyard poultry have been increasing in popularity for probably the last decade. Since some of the big cities are allowing people to have, a small number of hens, usually the limit's like 4 to 6 hens per household. And we started looking at this, like the number of hens that are coming into our hospital here was increasing. And when people are bringing these hens in, some of them absolutely love these chickens, just like they're a dog or a cat, which some people are like, really? But they're pretty personable. And so they wanted to give them the best treatment they could. But a lot of the medications that are out there that we would use for chickens, so they're not necessarily labeled for use in chickens, but we can use things off label if you've got that client-patient relationship. But when we give them those medications, we don't know what the drug withdrawal time is for egg consumption. And so, like, if I were to treat your chicken with a particular antibiotic, if we don't have the data to know how long it actually takes to clear it out of the eggs, you might be eating eggs or giving eggs to your neighbor that have this antibiotic in it, and oops, their daughter actually has an allergy to it. And you send their daughter to the hospital with anaphylaxis. And so what we did is we started looking at a couple of different medications. Really, they're honestly like not groundbreaking studies that are going to win me a Nobel Prize. But what we were looking at is, okay, we started with Leghorn chickens, which are a common commercial breed. But we had access to a farm that would basically loan them to us for the study, and then we'd give them back. And so it was a pretty easy arrangement. And we would give the hens medication for, a single dose or multi-day dosing for a certain medication, and look at, what is the proper dose to give the chicken so that it's therapeutic. But then also, how long does it stay in the eggs for? And so, like if you go to the grocery store, any meat that you buy should have no antibiotics in it, right? Because if that cow ever got an antibiotic, there's a certain withdrawal time that you have to wait before it can go to slaughter. And there's just not a whole lot of data regarding eggs, because the commercial poultry egg producers, if you get a sick chicken, they're not going to treat it, right? So it usually just gets culled from the flock. And so that's what we've been trying to gather data on these last couple of years, is looking at a few different commonly used medications, as well as looking at a couple of different breeds of chickens, because they actually don't have all the same metabolism. And so we know this in dogs that, some dogs metabolize things faster than others, different breeds. And so what we did is we looked at a couple of different breeds of chicken and found that some of them actually metabolize this particular medication called meloxicam. It's a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, kind of like ibuprofen, that we commonly use in vet medicine. And the species or the different breeds actually metabolize them at different speeds. And so that affects how frequently you should dose them. Fortunately, it doesn't have a big impact on how long it takes them to clear out of the eggs. It's still similar. So we've been trying to fill some of those holes so that our veterinary practitioners have a better idea of, okay, what can we use to treat with? How long does it take to clear out of the eggs, so that I can actually correctly tell the owners, okay, throw the eggs out for the next 10 days, next 14 days, or whatever it is. Don't eat them for then.
That's interesting. So that's a particular backyard chicken problem, because these are pets that people want to keep healthy and stick around in industrial.
So in industry, they're not going to do that. But with the number of people that have backyard poultry now, it's a huge deal across. And so there's a number of people that are board certified in avian medicine. But so I'm one of them. But when I got trained, I almost saw no poultry, because we were seeing parrots and finches and birds like that. But it's very much shifted. Not that we're not seeing those anymore, but we're seeing a lot more poultry, because there's this increasing popularity, because people want to have local food. They want to have these, animals that they know how they're treated, what's going into them, that they're, actually being humanely treated. And so I think in Knoxville, they changed the city policy maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, that you could have poultry hens in the city limits, which historically you couldn't. And a lot of bigger cities are doing that as well.
Yeah. Is that, who's anti-chicken? There's people.
There's anti-anything. There's always people that are against things.
I get a rooster waking you up or something like that. What other problems do rural chickens cause problems for anybody?
As long as you don't have too many of them. So chickens can definitely stink. They poop a lot. So it can be kind of stinky. And if people don't clean up the coops frequently, you may end up with more flies. They don't make a whole lot of noise, certainly relative to roosters. But there's always people that are against things. But it's usually kind of the smell associated with them, because chickens poop a lot.
Yeah. What's going on with you go to the store, the eggs say free range on it. Seems like a scam to me. Like, I mean, because I read free range and I picture old McDonald's farm and it's like a chicken in a hammock or something like that, just living its best life, and
someone's feeding it bugs.
And the reality is like free range is okay. These chickens are allowed a 15 by 15 foot space that they may not actually ever see in their lifetime because they're at the other end of some huge airplane hangar, basically with 1,000 chickens between them and the outdoors, so they don't even know that it's there. Probably both of those things are extreme. But what's up with free range? Is it anything?
Well, so I mean, the labeling on eggs is kind of I don't know honestly how regulated it really is.
Right.
And so if we think about most eggs, if they don't say anything, they're typically raised in what are called battery cages, which are these tiny little cages, maybe like, I mean, the chicken can't really even turn around. They have almost no space. Then there's also cage-free, free range. And so they're just kind of a variety. It's a spectrum of, so even if it's free range, that doesn't usually mean they're going outside.
Right.
I mean, typically anything that is raised for commercial purposes, they are completely enclosed in a house. It's a matter of, okay, do they have a battery cage that they have no space? There's some that have smaller cages that are, I'm trying to think what those are even labeled, that they're not, I mean, they're still cages, but they may be free range, but they're not. And that's the thing is like a lot of the labeling I don't know exactly even how regulated it is. And so if you can get free range and it's the same price, I mean, it's probably better than the battery cages, but is it worth twice the price? I don't know. And that's one of the reasons that people are getting backyard poultry. The other label that honestly drives me insane is when it says vegetarian fed hens. So I don't know if you know anything about chickens, but they love bugs.
Okay. Yeah.
They love bugs. Like, they don't want to be vegetarians.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of it, and there's been quite a bit of...
People make their dogs vegan and stuff. That's fun.
Like, they're not... No. That's not evolutionarily a good idea.
Yeah.
And so there's been actually a lot of back and forth over the years between the government and the poultry industry, like the commercial poultry industry, trying to come up with standards because... some states have requirements that they can't be in battery cages. Other ones allow it. And so it makes it difficult to sell across state lines because you've got to meet certain standards for one state, not another. And so there's kind of this back and forth about trying to come up with language that is consistent nationally for those commercial flocks.
Yeah. I mean, the world's changing. There literally was, when I was a kid, I grew up around literally like old McDonald-ish type farms where you'd go and they'd have a few pigs and a chicken coop and some cows and stuff. And that it doesn't exist anymore.
At least not very often. Yeah, I just took a trip out west, road trip out west and to get out of town for a little bit and went past so many feedlots, like large cattle feedlots. And it's just, is that the best thing that we can do? Can we do better?
Yeah. So speaking of disease spread, how in the heck do you manage disease spread if you have that many chickens how many chickens are they sticking in like one space? How are you even knowing if like one of those chickens gets sick?
Usually if one gets sick, a lot get sick. And so,
well, that's what I'd think.
Yeah. And so, I mean, most of the large commercial places, they have really pretty incredible biosecurity, and I'll just stick with chickens with this, although swine are pretty similar. So I went to vet school at North Carolina State, which has one of the largest swine and poultry production numbers. I think it's maybe like number 2 for swine and 2 or 3 for poultry production. And so we actually had quite a bit of poultry and swine in our curriculum, and we actually had houses that were essentially the same as a commercial house would be. And the biosecurity is really strict. They do a lot of preventive medicine, so making sure vaccines are on board to prevent diseases. But yeah, if you do get a disease in those houses of chickens will have thousands of chickens in them. And so if you get a nasty disease in there, it's going to run through it pretty quickly. And they end up culling houses. Like if you get an avian influenza, they end up culling the entire house.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So how are rural chickens getting diseases? Like they're like a little, what'd you say? You have like 5 chickens or something like that?
Me? I have like 16. I have four goats, but I've got like 16 or 18.
Oh, 16. The smile on your face when you said that too, it was like,
16.
there was shame and pride in
they
the
are pretty cute. I do like them.
Yeah. But so what kind of, your chickens in particular, what kind of things are you worried about?
They certainly could get diseases from wild birds. Honestly, in my
what do you
flock,
mean? Like something drops a
like if wild birds are interacting, like mine are not enclosed, they're running around outside.
Oh.
And so they could potentially come into contact with something a wild bird was carrying. So whether that's a virus or a bacteria. Honestly, most of the things that I've had issues with mine have been old age. And so I've had a couple that have just like, they essentially go into organ failure because they're really old. Other things that a lot of hens will have problems with, like just in a backyard poultry collection, is that because they're making so many eggs, they can sometimes end up with reproductive disease. And so they'll end up with, sometimes if the egg doesn't leave the ovary correctly, it ends up in the basically the coelomic or abdominal cavity. And they can end up with a lot of, I guess, adhesions is the word, but it's basically like it gets all gummed up in there with just like cheesy looking stuff, and their intestines don't work anymore, and their body basically shuts down from this huge inflammatory response. And so a lot of the stuff that I see in mine are not necessarily infectious diseases. The other problem I have is if occasionally they get out of where they're supposed to be and one of my dogs finds them and decides, oh, it's a squeaky toy. And then it doesn't always go so well. And I've had to repair one or two and euthanize one or two because my dumb dogs decide to play with them.
Right. So what's the average person have to look out for? Similar?
I would say so certainly, at least in the most parts of our country, I'd say predation is a huge problem. So if you don't have a secure setting for your poultry, critters are out there just waiting to eat them. So whether it's coyotes or raccoons, they will get in and do their best to try and make a mess of your collection. But otherwise, so there was an avian influenza outbreak in backyard poultry in kind of, I guess it was South Middle Tennessee a couple years ago. And they're guessing it probably got in from some wild birds, and they had to go in and cull the entire flock. I don't remember. It wasn't a huge flock, but it was bigger than I've got. But so certainly, avian influenza, Newcastle disease, those are diseases that wild birds can carry and potentially spread to your backyard chickens. Probably, honestly, the biggest thing to be worried about. What's
Newcastle disease? I've never heard of that.
So Newcastle disease is, it's not something that's generally a problem for people, but it's a virus that can cause really similar things that avian influenza does. There is a pretty decent sized outbreak in California that's been kind of like they've been trying whack-a-mole to get rid of it over the last number of years because it'll pop up here and they kind of sniff it out and it comes up here. There was a really big outbreak of Newcastle in, I think it was 2003 in California and Arizona. It was associated with fighting cocks that were illegal, but they were being transferred around, and then it got into the commercial chickens. But it can lead to a really high mortality rate in chicken flocks, particularly in those not only backyard, but also if it gets into commercial, it can just go through a flock, and it's probably got close to 100% mortality.
Man, cockfighting always seems like such a great idea, and then you forget about those little details.
You're like, oh wait, these people actually, they're not really following the rules in terms of moving their birds around, and since it's illegal. But
and I cut you off to ask you about Newcastle, but you're going to say one of the worst things.
No, so one of the worst things that we honestly need to worry about with backyard poultry that I think a lot of folks don't think about, because a lot of folks that end up with backyard poultry have never really had livestock, is salmonella. And so with the increase in all these backyard poultry flocks, they're seeing a lot more cases of salmonellosis associated with them. So people hug in and they're kissing their chicken and they're not doing a good. Oh yeah, come on. There's pictures.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think I'd kiss a chicken, but
I wouldn't either.
I wouldn't mind a good chicken cuddle and like.
Well, and I mean, I'll hold mine, but I'm not kissing them. But also just like, with making sure that you're doing good sanitation with the eggs, because a lot of chickens just carry salmonella. It's part of their normal flora, not a big deal. But if we end up accidentally eating it, it's not always the best thing, right? And so a lot of folks that aren't all that familiar with good biosecurity sometimes end up with these salmonella outbreaks. And sometimes it's from when they first get the little chicks that are just so super cute. And the chicks are basically just pooping out salmonella constantly. And so there's been quite a few outbreaks over the last, I don't know, probably 10 years. And I think it even got worse during the pandemic because so many people were stuck at home. They're like, oh, let's get some poultry. And so they got all these little baby poultry and they ended up having salmonella issues.
What happens when you get salmonella? You always, I guess I've just always been reminded of salmonella my whole life. Just don't get it. And I'm like, well, I better not get
you'll be sitting on the toilet.
Salmonella. And yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's usually just bad GI. You'll have really bad diarrhea. Most people, as long as you're otherwise healthy, can recover without antibiotics, but it sometimes can lead to worse, symptoms in people that are don't have a good immune system, or maybe sometimes kids that'll, end up like kissing the baby chicken and end up with all this salmonella. Yeah.
I'll take a chance on diarrhea, honestly. If I
get
to
diarrhea?
hang out with, I mean, if it's guaranteed diarrhea, maybe not, but I don't know. If I have chickens, I feel like I want to play with them a little bit.
Well, sure. I think it's just that folks are.
You just got to be careful.
Well, you need to wash your hands. So like when you go collect the eggs, wash your hands afterward, and like don't wear your poopy flock boots into the house and get poop all over your, things like that.
Yeah, I'll take the boots off. Washing the hands, I got to be honest with myself about realistically how much I'm going to do that. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. It's a lot to think about before I get chickens, but I'm for it. What about chickens? If you want to give a chicken its best life, you have a pet chicken, you just want it to be happy and playing and loving its life. What are some of the things you can do?
Let it be outside.
Yeah, that's it. There's no toys for pet chickens or anything like that.
I mean, as long as they're out on grass and dirt, they get out there and they're scratching, they're looking for bugs, they're running around, eating grass. Like, they've got a pretty good life unless they get outside the fence and then my dog finds them.
Okay.
But yeah, and I guess some places they'll have raptors that'll come in. So like hawks or stuff will sometimes come in and take them. So that's not ideal, but as long as they're outside and they've got good nutrition and they've got sunlight, I'm sure that sometimes the weather is not ideal. I think it was funny. Last year we got a bunch of snow on Christmas Eve. And we got like 6 inches, which is a lot for us. And my chickens would not come out of the coop all day. They're just like, nope, not going out there.
Do you, oh shoot, what was I going to? I felt like I had such a good backyard chicken question for you. It's not that good. Not that good at all, but I'm still curious. I'm going to take a guess at it. Lifespan of a chicken, 5 years.
They can live longer. They're
close?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think, the longest one I've got living now is, she's probably about 7 or 8 years old. Yeah. Most of mine are like 3 and 4 age range. I think one of my coworkers, she's got some that are like 10 and 12. Those are definitely like the end of the spectrum, but probably 5 years is a reasonable guess for how long before they sometimes end up with issues. But their productive life in terms of laying eggs is probably like, I don't know, 3 to 4 years, and then they'll start to decline with production. Like my big, I call her Big Mama because she's my biggest girl. She's a Buff Orpington. She's like this really pretty big chicken. She doesn't lay very many eggs anymore. Mm-hmm. But she's funny, so it's fine.
full grown in like what, 6 months, 9 months?
They'll start laying usually in like, I don't know, maybe like 8 or 9 months usually. The ones that I've had. Sometimes a little bit earlier, a little bit later, but.
Because if you're making poultry, you just 6 months in, they're fully grown, just boom.
Oh, it's
done,
less than
right?
that.
You don't just keep feeding a thing for no reason.
No, if you're making it for meat, so like the ones that the broilers that they actually have in commercial, those are usually done going, like they probably kill them at, I don't know, like 2 months maybe. They grow super fast.
Aren't chickens like the most populous mammal on Earth?
They're not mammals. They're animals.
Animals.
Yes.
On Earth.
Yeah.
On Earth.
Yeah, I don't know what the numbers are, but I've heard that like there's like billions and billions and billions of chickens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chickens are winning in a way. I mean, it's hard to.
Are they? I mean, would you want to be one?
Numbers wise, no. I mean, you just become a fully formed adult and you lose your head immediately just for growing correctly.
Yeah.
And then you're cooped up in places a lot of times. If you're lucky, you're a backyard chicken. That's the best chicken you can be, I feel like.
Well, so
it's free range. There's some wild chicken. That's not. Unless you're in like Key West or something like that, that doesn't really happen many places, right? Some countries maybe.
I think there's feral ones in Hawaii too. I've seen when I was there years ago. I saw a bunch of chickens running around. I was like, all right,
feral chickens.
Yeah, feral chickens. But yeah.
Okay, and I want to ask you about your other. Well, first of all, could you explain to the audience what the One Health initiative is? Because they'll be happy to get a plug.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess it maybe started 1.5 years, 2 years ago, and it was years in the making. And so the One Health term got coined, I don't know, maybe like 15, 20 years ago. And really the idea is that we need to start working across disciplines to solve these big problems that we're facing as a planet. And so, historically, you think about, physicians, they work with physicians, veterinarians work with veterinarians. Those ecosystem scientists or wildlife biologists, they tend to hang out together. And so really trying to bridge the different disciplines to look at, okay, what can we do to prevent further, spillover of coronaviruses from bats into an intermediate mammal into humans? How do we get social scientists involved with community interventions to, reduce reliance on bushmeat? And so, really trying to think of the bigger picture and what disciplines can play a role in solving those problems. And whether that's prevention of diseases in our livestock or in spillover to people, or, food security for our growing human population across the planet, making sure that we're preserving our wildlife, because there's certainly a lot of value in ecosystems. But I think really the take home is that we need to break down the silos of professionals and work across those professions to try and come up with solutions that work.
Amazing. I'm super. I mean, it's something that I just think is. I've been doing this podcast for over 7 years now. I think you're my 350th guest or whatever. And I've talked with so many people in so many different fields, and it's just, you just make a lot of connections over time. And yeah, they, like you said, those silos, that doesn't help anybody. And even in terms of, I had, you probably know Barbara Natterson. No? She wrote a book called Wildhood, and Zoobiquity is another book.
Zoobiquity. I know. Did she write that?
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe I'm wrong. Don't remember. Regardless. Yeah, I know Zoobiquity is, though.
But yeah, she was is a heart surgeon, and
okay. I just didn't know her name because.
And then she's on the show, but that was a good example of, and because she got called over to the zoo to look at some primates' hearts, and then she started learning all of these things that applied to humans as well, and it's just a very good example of why we need to know things about chickens and things like that. That actually it's all, I'm sure chickens from a chicken's point of view also are pretty chicken centric and think chickens are the best thing on earth and only care about chickens, and everything else is probably the natural way in which any species perceives things. But for humans to have to understand, to be able to see all of these other implications that are kind of hidden beneath the surface and see the many connections that do impact our lives is something really cool to see, that is becoming more and more a prominent way of looking at things. And so yeah, the One Health Initiative is awesome. But you do some outreach with a group called with an organization called H.A.B.I.T.
Yeah.
Correct?
So one of the things that's kind of fun about being a public health veterinarian is that you can put your fingers into a whole lot of things. So obviously I've talked about infectious diseases and epidemiology and chickens, and something else that we work with it's called the Human Animal Bond in Tennessee. And this is it's an animal assisted intervention group, and it's based here at the College of Veterinary Medicine, and it's been around for I think 35 years now. So I was not the one that started it. I took it over a number of years ago, and basically we've got a huge group of wonderful volunteers, and mostly they're dogs, and they will go out and do visits at nursing homes and hospitals and outpatient centers and dialysis centers, and they'll also go to schools, and kids will practice reading to the kids, and so it's just kind of a great group that we've got. I think about 650 volunteers that go to facilities all over East Tennessee. We've got some in Middle Tennessee as well. And it's just kind of a feel-good thing that, everybody loves to pet a dog. And it's really fun to read to a dog. And so it's just kind of a good, good way to bridge that, the fuzziness of an animal and the good feelings you get from petting those animals. Sometimes, particularly if you're in a tough situation. So like we've got dogs that go to the oncology ward across the river at the UT Medical Center. So people that are getting chemotherapy can pet a dog and kind of forget why they're there for a couple of minutes. And so it's just kind of a great outreach program that our college supports.
Yeah. Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Where, is it? So you get volunteers that own dogs already.
Yeah. So we've got 3 staff, actually 2.25 staff members, that they basically do all the logistics of matching people to a facility that fits their needs, be it, time of day, location, type of facility. But yeah, so these are basically people that it's their pet dogs. They're not necessarily trained to do this. They're just generally good dogs. We don't have any sort of requirement of breed. They do have to pass a behavior test, and they've also got to get annual physicals from a veterinarian to make sure they're getting proper preventive medicine. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had my first dog episode like a few weeks ago. I'm like, what? I don't know. I feel like I dropped the ball on dogs a little bit because it's I tend to just stay away from things that just people generally are really interested. I try to stay away from popular things in particular. I tend to like exploring things that you don't hear about as often. But I bring it up because dogs also seem like such a great way to get, going to schools and things like that. It seems like such a great way to get people interested in education. I feel like I would have paid a lot more attention as a kid if I would have gotten to interact with animals and stuff on a more regular basis. Have you ever considered bringing some chickens around, showing them what's up with chickens?
Well, so we're probably not going to do that because they poop too much and they have salmonella. But we have had a few folks that they'll request, hey, can I have my pet serval be part of H.A.B.I.T? And I don't know if you know what a serval is.
What's a serval? So
it's this African savanna cat that they stand, their back is maybe, 3 feet tall. They're an exotic pet, and we said no. Like, no, we're not going to go there and occasionally we'll have someone, I've got a really great parrot. And it's like, no, we're not. And so we're pretty selective about what type of species we'll allow. And so we basically had dogs for the most part. That's the vast majority. I've had a handful of cats, but you think about cats, it's got to be a pretty special cat to put up with people petting it, and it's going in the car and things like that. And we have had a few rabbits.
Allergic.
Yeah, well, yes, I'm allergic to cats too. So Like I would be like, no thanks, I don't want to pet the cat. Like I'll start sneezing and but yeah, so it's mostly
some
dogs.
rabbits.
Yeah, we've had a few rabbits.
They bite ever?
No, and so we usually, so they've got to go through a behavioral evaluation that will kind of almost like poke them and annoy them just a little bit.
I see.
To make sure that they're just like, whatever, it's cool. Like just in case, if a kid pulls an ear or like pinches a toe, that the dog's not going to bite them or stuff like that.
My first pet was a rabbit, and it didn't
go well.
Its situation. And it was a biter, but all right. Let me see. What else did I want to cover? So, what do you think in terms of, so again, I want to make this case that, because you said early on, people weren't as interested in epidemiology and people, didn't you say something like people tend to be more interested in like surgery and stuff like that? Because to me, that's, come on, surgery's like playing a video game or something. There's like an artistry to it, sure, but it hardly feels like thought work. I mean, sure, there's like things to know and everything else, but it's like, it's a skill. You're cutting into things. You're just
I'm going to make sure that once
disrespect to surgeons.
I'm going to make sure I play this for the surgeons once it's done.
But I honestly, I feel like surgeons are overrated. I don't know. I mean, listen, I've had 2 foot surgeries. I've had my tonsils taken out. I'm grateful to the surgeries that I've had that improved my life. But at the end of the day, it's like they get all the status in today's culture. Everyone's like, wow, that person's a surgeon. And I don't know. I don't think that they're making as many connections and things as something like
so vet medicine is similar. So like basically in veterinary medicine, similar to human medicine, it's the surgeons that are like, yes, they're super. So like you can go and do a residency in surgery as well as a bunch of other specialties in vet medicine, just like human medicine. And the surgical residencies are super competitive, really hard to get.
Yeah.
And it's someone's got to do it. That's cool. I don't know that I was never that interested in it.
I dated a veterinarian, and her specialties we did it for a few years. Her specialties were spay and neuter. Like she was so quick at it.
Oh yeah, she probably do it in like 6 minutes.
Oh, less than that.
Yeah.
Like, and so it was, it was scary just being around her, like, getting in a disagreement or whatever. Because she also did home euthanasia as well. So she had just all the things, just like laying around the apartment, just things for killing. And so it was like, I was always on my best behavior, but it was kind of intense. But yeah, that's what all of that's all the prestige is, just, wow, that person's great with a scalpel. Like,
what?
I don't care.
Well, I'll be interested to see. So like we, at UT, we have a dual, Doctorate of Veterinary Medicine and Masters of Public Health program. And I'll be curious to see with our incoming classes if we end up with more students doing the dual program with the pandemic. Because we typically have like between 3 and 5 in each of the classes that decide to go that route. And it'll be interesting to see if so our first years are starting orientation, I guess, next week. And it'll be interesting to see how many of them are like, oh yeah, I want to do that. That's way cooler than surgery. But
what's going on with COVID and zoonosis? There was talk early on that dogs were maybe getting it, and has there been any?
Yeah, so there have been other animals that have ended up getting it from people. The biggest, and so basically it originally spilled into people, and then people are giving it back out to other animals. The ones that's been the biggest issue have been mink. So did I just see something? Like, who knew there were so many mink farms? There's mink farms all over the place, like in Europe, as well as in the United States. And so basically the COVID got into these mink farms, and it started mutating and actually spilled back into some people. And so this happened initially in Denmark, but also a bunch of other European countries as well. And so they have gone in and they actually culled all those mink in the farms. And they're starting to, I think they've maybe developed a vaccine, or they're in the process of developing a vaccine for the mink. So they're the ones that's been the biggest issue. There have been a few cases in cats, and so domestic cats as well as big cats in zoos. There have been a few dogs that have been diagnosed with it, but they weren't actually sick. And so like they got exposed, they ended up with antibodies, maybe even a little bit of virus, but they didn't actually get sick from it. So the only animals that have actually gotten sick from it have been felids, like a variety of cat species, and then also mink, and I'm trying to think if there's been any ferret cases, but basically the mustelids, which include mink. But those have been the biggest one that they've had to cull a bunch. But when those reports started coming out last year, I was like, why are there so many mink farms?
What's up with minks? Well, you must know now, right? What is it? People are just wearing mink.
Who wears fur anymore?
No, yeah, it is strange. Plus, specifically mink. It's like,
yeah.
Huh.
I mean, it's not, so in terms of them being susceptible to a respiratory pathogen, it's not that surprising. So ferrets, so like domestic ferrets that people have as pets, those are routinely used in influenza research. And so they're closely related to mink. And so their respiratory, basically anatomy and receptors are really similar to ours. And so they've been used for research in flu for a long time. And so when it spilled into them, I was like, oh, it's not that surprising, but it's kind of weird. I was more surprised by how many mink farms there are.
Yeah. What do you think about, if I can have a just utterly nonsense conversation with you, since we've been talking about domesticating things, ferrets, what do you think about pet ferrets? Into it, against it?
I don't have a problem with it. I would never own one because they smell terrible.
Yeah.
The biggest issue is they're so inbred, is that they all get disease. They all get adrenal tumors. They get insulinomas. And so they're like little cancer factories because they've been inbred. At least here in the United States, there's like basically one big producer of them. And so like when you get a ferret, you need to go ahead and have a savings account to pay for all the treatment you're going to have to deal with in like 3 to 4 years, because they pretty much all get these cancers. So, I mean, they're not bad as pets. It must be so
weird to be at a party and be like, what do you do? And they're like, I am the only ferret producer in
North America,
the Western Hemisphere. Whoa.
Yeah, look at you.
What about all right. I'm curious what you think about. I've been thinking about oddball critters to have around the house and just what's reasonable and what's not. There's, according to Instagram pictures and video, which is misleading, of course, raccoons are kind of having a day right now. I feel like raccoons are like getting more and more popular. Seems like a bad idea, right?
It's a bad idea.
They're super smart and everything. And
they're smart, everything. But like they are wild animals, and so they're not domesticated. And so basically, the way that people control them is they bribe them with food, and then they end up really fat. Then they end up with diabetes or thyroid issues, and so they're bad idea.
Okay.
Yeah, bad idea.
All right. No to raccoons. What about? This is one just started springing up. Flying squirrels.
Do you mean sugar gliders or flying squirrels? Okay.
I think I mean sugar gliders.
So sugar gliders have been in the pet trade for a while.
Okay.
Okay. No.
Are we into it? No.
No.
I mean, there's some great videos. Oh yeah, sure that's what they are.
So they're nocturnal for one thing. So if you are not also nocturnal, that's not really the best pet.
Okay.
If you only have a single sugar glider, they often mutilate themselves. And so, like,
oh my God.
Yeah. So like if you have a male, he will routinely like chew bits of himself off.
Well, that's kind of not an unusual thing in species that are not, like in cages, like by themselves or whatever.
Well, sure. They'll do neurotic
like
things, but they don't necessarily like chew off parts of themselves. They may like
Wow.
But so if you're going to have a sugar glider, you need to have 2 usually. So they've got a buddy.
Usually you see like 4 on the videos and they're like hanging out on a basketball hoop and then someone just holds their hand out and then they jump and glide into their hand and it looks fantastic.
It looks
you can
really
see
fun.
the appeal, but it's like
they're not house
also
trained.
babies look fun in photos and I know that no
That's
thank
not true.
you.
Yeah, so I'm going to give them a thumbs down too.
Okay. You got any outliers that you're like, that would be an okay.
Well, so I did a residency in zoo and exotic medicine before I went the public health route. And so I've got all kinds of experience working with these exotic animals. And so in terms of what considers exotic pets, and so that's like pretty much anything not dog, cat. This is going to make people cringe, but one of my favorites that falls into that, and it's not really a wild animal, are rats. Rats actually make really good pets.
Yeah. I'm into that.
They're smart. They're cute. Sometimes they've been bred to have like these big goofy Dumbo ears. They'll have different colors. Yeah. And so usually if someone wants to get a different animal, that's usually what I recommend because they're generally pretty clean. Everyone can't get past that tail though. It's like, oh, the tail's so gross. It's like, you'll get past it. It's fine. But they're actually one of my favorite non-normal pets.
I had a turtle for a while. That was pretty easy. It was an easy one.
It is easy, but you've got to get it right.
It didn't do a lot for me.
Yeah, you've got to get it right though with like their temperature and the humidity and the light. Like if you screw that up, their shell gets all wonky and they don't develop right.
Still alive as far as I know. Never grew. Maybe that's why.
And X has
it. Yeah, I just visited like 2 years ago and it was still kicking 15 years later or something like that. Small little thing fits in your hand in a little aquarium. You can leave for days and just dump some food in there. Seemed fun. Maybe I'm not supposed to do that. Maybe you're not supposed to tell that to someone in veterinary medicine that you just dump food in there and leave for a few days.
Well, I mean, turtles are...
It seemed like super easy.
As long as you've got the light right and then they can be pretty good. Making sure they've got enough UV light that's correct is the challenge, because then their bones don't develop right and their shell gets all messed up. And they're also salmonella carriers. So turtles.
What's the worst thing about backyard chickens? Because I felt like we were pretty pro backyard chicken on this show.
Probably the worst thing about them is that you do have to take care of them every day. You can't just like abandon them for a week. And honestly, the potential for salmonella is probably the biggest issue.
Yeah.
I mean, they're really easy birds to work with though. Like they don't attack you. They don't, well, maybe a rooster will occasionally, but they're pretty easy.
All right. That's I think that's a lot of...
Go with the chickens, not the goats.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of pro chicken propaganda that we've spread. I think
they're not supporting me. I don't get any kickbacks.
Awesome. Well, this has been really fun, Marcy.
It has been.
Thanks for joining me.
Yeah.
And thanks for all the work that you do. And that's really cool. If people want to learn more about, say they're in Tennessee or whatever, they want to learn more about H.A.B.I.T, which is human animal bond in Tennessee. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Where do they go?
Do a Google search for human animal bond in Tennessee. I think our website is probably habit.utk.edu, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Well, I'll just put it in I'll put it in all this stuff.
Yeah, I can. I think it's habit.utk.edu. But yeah, so we do. If you are interested in volunteering with your dog, we do orientations a couple times a year. And now with COVID, hopefully slowly receding, we are getting people back out visiting. So we had to pull back a lot of those visitors when, people didn't want volunteers coming in their facilities that were, who knows what they might have been carrying. Yeah.
You think slowly receding? I think making a comeback.
Let me rephrase that.
I think fall and winter is going to be...
Let me rephrase that. By the time you get this edited and put out, I'm hoping... Well, so right now, I mean, we're talking, this is early August. Things are not good. We're basically on the upswing in a lot of parts of the country. A lot of the predictions are saying that this upswing is going to go for about 4 to 6 weeks and we'll get another lull. And then come December, we're going to have another surge again. So we'll see.
Okay. Well, it seems like heat A lot of it's happening in the South, right? You got heat, you got people indoors with air conditioning. That's got to be a factor.
And a lot of
Higher
unvaccinated
rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Vaccine rates are not great down here.
Right.
So.
Well, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we will.
Well, it was absolutely lovely talking with you.
Me too.
Marcy Souza, everybody. Souza, right?
Souza.
Yeah, okay. Marcy Souza. Thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, for being such wonderful, curious people. We'll talk with you more next week.